Welcome to the Stoic Responder Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Healy. As a special agent who spent more than 15 years conducting large-scale fraud, money laundering, and public corruption investigations, Stoic philosophy provided a mindset edge that became the foundation of my professional success. My mission today is to share those same ancient mindset lessons with you so that you can turn obstacles into opportunities and adversity into advantage. Time to muster up. All right, folks, welcome to the Stoic Responder Podcast. If you are listening from the United States, happy Independence Day. And most of you, when I look at the analytics, are listening from the United States, although I do have some loyal Canadian listeners and some folks from other parts of the world. But welcome, and thank you so much for tuning in. I know a lot of people are on vacation this week. A lot of people are out and about. You may not be listening to this humble podcast, but if you are, it is my goal to serve you today. I'm going to begin, before we get into the meat of the show, by talking a little bit about the Stoic connection to Independence Day. There's some interesting stuff here. Number one, there's a debate about whether or not July 2nd or July 4th should really be considered America's Independence Day. Reason being, the Continental Congress actually voted in favor of the resolution for independence on July 2nd in a near unanimous vote, but it wasn't until July 4th that the Continental Congress formally adopted the Declaration of Independence, which had been written largely by Jefferson. Now, Jefferson was a Stoic himself, or at least he was educated in the ways of the Stoics. He read the Stoics, he read Seneca, he read Marcus Aurelius, he read Epictetus. He talks in his letters. He writes letters and makes several references to the Stoics. And in one, he talks about how every jar has two handles, one from which you can grasp and one which you cannot, essentially talking about the dichotomy of control in a very similar way that Epictetus laid it out, almost word for word. So there are a lot of references in the Founding Fathers to the Stoic philosophers, which I find fascinating as a student of history. And I love reading about the revolution. I love reading about these incredible people who founded this wonderful system of government that we have, this incredible country that we have, this incredible republic that we live in. And I love knowing who influenced them, because these were incredible minds. These were incredible thought leaders. And so to know that Jefferson leaned heavily on the Stoics and that he was the one who actually wrote the Declaration of Independence that we are celebrating today on July 4th is fascinating to me, knowing that 1,800 years before he existed, there were these incredible philosophers who, through the ages, passed down wisdom that influenced our founders in founding this incredible country. I also find it super interesting that Jefferson and Adams, who were, of course, very good friends in the Continental Congress and in the early days of the American experience, but had a tremendous falling out over politics a few years into the country's founding. I find it tremendously interesting that both of them, who were chiefly responsible for the Declaration of Independence that was, of course, adopted on July 4th, 1776, that the two of them had this tremendous friendship that led to a massive falling out over politics. They came back together as friends later in life through a correspondence that was spurred on by Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, and that the two of them died on the same day. 50 years to the day, July 4th, 1826, 50 years to the day that the document that they collaborated on, the Declaration of Independence, was adopted by the First Continental Congress. I find that stuff absolutely fascinating. But the final tie that I want to get into between the founders and the Stoics is the connection between the founders and what's referred to by some as America's forgotten founding father, and that is Cato, also known as Cato the Younger, also known by his formal name, which is like Marcus Porcius Cato the Younger. Now, he was a Roman senator at the very end of the Roman Republic, and he was kind of the chief rival to Julius Caesar, who eventually overthrew the Republic and created the dictatorship that later became the Empire of Rome. Now, this is in the early days of Stoicism. This is in, again, Stoicism was founded in the Hellenistic period. So this is a couple hundred years after the school is founded. And Cato kind of fancies himself as the public face of Stoicism during this time. And that's very dangerous, because at the time, the school of Stoicism was considered subversive. It was considered very un-Roman. But Cato was very steadfast as a senator, and he believed in self-discipline and self-control and temperance. He believed in the Republic of Rome. He believed that Rome should remain a republic. And so he fought very much against the rise of Caesar. He struggled against his rule. And when it became clear that he would lose, that when the Civil War and I won't get into all of the Civil War and all of that stuff and the breakdown. You don't need a history lesson here. But the bottom line is he stands up to Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar overthrows the Senate, takes over Rome, creates a dictatorship, and Cato fights until essentially he realizes that there is no fight left. And he commits what's considered by many to be a noble suicide. In other words, he refuses to live under Caesar's rule, and after he loses on the battlefield, he ends his own life. And it's considered a very stoic act to do, to not bow your principles, to not bow your head to an unjust individual, to stand firm in your beliefs to the point that you will die for them. That was considered a very stoic thing. And America's founding fathers all leaned heavily into the myth of Cato. In fact, one of the great stories from the American Revolution is during Valley Forge, during that horrible winter at Valley Forge. Food was scarce, things were terrible. It was, there was typhoid, there was jaundice, there was all sorts of disease that was ravaging the Continental Army. It was a bitter winter. There was genuine concern that this was it, that the revolution was going to end. And Washington, who was also a student of the Stoics and very much a fan of Cato, he chose to stage a play for his officer corps that was a story of Cato. It was called Cato, a Tragedy, and it was a play that was very popular in England, written by a playwright named Joseph Addison. And it was a personal favorite of Washington. He stages this play, and it essentially, and Washington and his peers, Benjamin Franklin, Sam Adams, John Adams, they all were familiar with this play. In fact, they quoted it frequently. You can see in John Adams' love letters to his wife Abigail, he quotes Cato in this play. Patrick Henry famously dared King George, "Give me liberty or give me death." He was quoting. He was kind of, cribbing from Cato. Nathan Hale, when he said, "I regret that I have but one life to live for this country," before the British Army hanged him for treason, that was taken directly from this play. So Washington stages this play at Valley Forge, and it's done as a way to let the American officers know that we are fighting a just cause, even if ultimately it doesn't end well. We're fighting a just cause. And it actually helped to raise the spirits of the people at Valley Forge. And it's often credited by historians as kind of a turning point in this drama at Valley Forge that gave people this thing to hold on to, that we are fighting against an unjust rule just as Cato did. And Cato represents liberty. Cato represents freedom. Cato represents that even if we die, we're dying for the cause that is well and just. That Cato was the last man standing when the Republic of Rome fell. And so he's been considered by our founding fathers to be kind of the perfect example of what a public servant should be, doing the right thing regardless of the cost, doing the right thing no matter what. And we get into a lot of stuff from Cato in my book, In Valor, 365 Stoic Meditations for First Responders. I hope you'll check it out if you're unfamiliar with Cato. But I find that interesting that our founding fathers, especially on this day, July 4th, I find it interesting that our founding fathers were so steeped in the Stoics, including Cato, who, again, was kind of the public face of Stoicism at that time, one of the earlier Stoics. He existed prior to Seneca, prior to Marcus Aurelius, and is really an incredible example to the people who founded this country. So whether you follow Stoicism, whether you follow the philosophy or not, know that the country that you live in was founded in large part on the principles that were espoused by great Stoic leaders like Cato. In fact, Washington in his time was known by many as America's Cato. Of course, his fate was different than Cato's. He won his revolution. He stood up to the bad guys and survived. But I find that stuff interesting. So getting on with the show today, folks. Today's title of the show is True North. The quote I'm leading with is from Seneca. "If a man knows not which port he sails, no wind is favorable." All right, let's get into it. Unlike magnetic north, which can vary based on factors such as the Earth's magnetic field, local magnetic anomalies, etc., true north represents a fixed point on the Earth's surface. It serves as a reference point, right, for navigation, for cartography, for geographical orientation. And in a metaphorical sense, having a true north means we have a clear sense of purpose and direction in one's life, kind of like Cato, right? It's a guiding light that helps to align actions, choices, and priorities with what truly matters most. It represents the moral and ethical foundation that influences our behavior and decision making, even in the face of uncertainty or adversity. Now, as first responders, we all like to think that we are rooted in principles of integrity, honesty, and compassion. We all like to think that we are being guided to act with kindness and empathy towards others because that's what we signed up for. But just like the sailor in that Seneca quote, without a clear destination or purpose, we can easily become adrift. We can easily become tossed about by the currents or the circumstances of our careers. We can be tossed about by chance, by fate. And just as a ship requires a destination to steer towards, so too do we. We need a sense of purpose and direction to guide our actions and decisions. Now, by intentionally defining our goals, our values, and aspirations, kind of like we did yesterday when we were that mantra, we're reminding ourselves of what our purpose is. By intentionally defining our goals, values, and aspirations, we gain the sense of clarity and focus that empowers us to overcome obstacles, to get through adversity, to persevere in the face of adversity, to become more resilient. And when we have that clear sense of purpose, even the most challenging circumstances can be seen as opportunities for growth and for learning. So what I would challenge you to do today, just as you did yesterday, but we're going to put a little different spin on it, is to figure out which port you're sailing to. You see, it's very easy in a first responder job to allow the job to define us, to allow ourselves to be given mission, task, and purpose by the fact that we wake up and we put on a uniform, that we have the flag on our shoulder, that we have the patch over our heart, that we have the badge, on our belt or on our chest or wherever it is, right? We wake up and we have mission, task, and purpose defined for us by the people we serve, by the agency we work for, by the department that we are employed by. But you need to figure out what your own true north is beyond that, beyond the badge. You see, I talked about this on my Instagram this week. There was recently a podcast host. If you guys listen to the Anti-Hero podcast, they had a show, and one of the hosts mentioned that he doesn't think there's any such thing as a happy retired cop. Now, I didn't listen to the whole show. I just saw kind of the clip that wound up on Instagram. And I think his point is well taken. He was basically saying guys after the job, they screw around, they fish for a couple months, whatever, but all of them end up being miserable that they left the job at some point or another. I think that's true, but I don't think that it has to be true. I think there are probably many, many, many first responders who figure it out, who retire and are very happy for it. I think there are a lot of first responders who don't know what to do with themselves without the mission, task, and purpose that is provided by the job. And I think that is what makes people miserable and unhappy. You see, but if we define our goals, our values, and aspirations, we gain a sense of clarity. We gain a sense of focus that empowers us to figure it out, right? To give us something to drive towards, to give us a port to sail towards. So it is important to not allow ourselves to just go to work every day, just strap on that gun belt, just put that vest on and go to work with the mission, task, and purpose that is provided for us by the job, because someday the job will end. And then we will be adrift, like that ship without a sail, like that ship that doesn't know where it's going. And if you don't know to which port you sail, no wind is favorable, as Seneca reminds us. So I'd encourage you today, right now, no matter what point of your career you're in, no matter where you're at, to sit down, get out that pen, get out that paper, get out that notebook, get out that journal, and consider your core values, your principles, your beliefs. What are those fundamental truths that guide your thoughts, your actions, and your decisions? I want you to write them down. Write them down. Actually commit them to paper. Figure out to what port you are sailing, regardless of if the job, the career ended tomorrow. What are your core values? What are your principles? What are your beliefs? And in that, you will find the direction in which you need to sail. Now, my hunch is that your core values, your principles, your beliefs led you to a career in law enforcement. So there are a lot of things in there, those fundamental truths that guide your thoughts, actions, and decisions are going to have a lot of overlap with the career. But you need to write them down. You need to put them on paper. You need to be honest. And then you need to start thinking about how those things can be applied in a way that gives you purpose, that gives you direction, that gives you that true north. Cato had a true north. America's Cato, George Washington had a true north. Jefferson had a true north. They all knew the port to which they sailed. They all knew their core values, their principles, their beliefs, those fundamental truths that guide that guided their thoughts, their actions, their decisions. You should do the same. Think about those things. Consider your core values, your principles, your beliefs. Make a list of them, write them down, commit them to paper. That's what I got for you today, folks. Before we head out, there's a couple ways that you can support this podcast. If you're enjoying the content here, you can pick up a copy of my book, In Valor, 365 Stoic Meditations for First Responders, anywhere that you get your books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc., etc. We do talk a lot about Cato in there. We talk a lot about stories exactly like this. And so if you find value in this, pick up a copy of the book. I like the paperback version, but you can also get it on ebook on Nook or on Kindle. Number 2, you can subscribe to the Stoic Responder for free on Substack. You can subscribe to it and get 4 episodes delivered to your mailbox every week into your email. You'll also get my newsletter where I do deeper dives on things like Cato, things like leadership, things like Marcus Aurelius's principles for leadership. If you're interested in the personal development aspect of Stoicism, subscribe for free. It is a free resource to you. You're going to get the podcast delivered directly to your email, but you're also going to get the newsletter, which is super valuable. And number 3, the easiest thing that you can do to support this podcast is just share and subscribe so that others can learn what we're doing here and can benefit from it as well. Folks, that's what I've got for you. Let me leave you real quick with the advice of John Adams and how you should celebrate the 4th of July. On July 2nd, John Adams writes to his wife, Abigail, that July 2nd, quote unquote, will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival, and that the celebration should include pomp and parade, game, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, whether you are celebrating on July 2nd or you're celebrating on July 4th. It doesn't matter. What does matter is that you need to get out there, fire off some guns, light a bonfire, ring some bells, shoot off some illuminations. That's not coming from me. That is coming from John Adams himself, the 2nd president of the United States, the 1st vice president, one of our founding fathers. He's telling you exactly how you got to get out there and celebrate. So get out there and do it. Have yourselves a happy 4th. Happy Independence Day, everybody. Until next time, you are out of roll. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, like, rate, and share this podcast so that we can spread the benefits of Stoicism to other first responders. It will only take you a few moments, but it can help us tremendously. Until next time, out of roll.